Unit 7 will cover Chapters 9 and Chapter 21. Chapter 9 covers the location plan for your small business, and Chapter 21 covers operations. Both of these will be components of the business plan, as you'll see just a little bit later on.
First thing we want to talk a little bit about are some of the choices that we have when it comes to our location for our company. And one of the things that I think this chapter in the text is a little bit light on is the impact or the opportunities that you have with a web-based or internet-based companies in today's environment. So in general, the text is a little bit behind there, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that some as we get into it here in just a little bit. So basically, you have three choices. You have a choice of a traditional brick and mortar type operation for your company, or you can even do it in your home, or you can make it a totally web-based. And there's also ways to kind of mix those three, and in particular mix two between the brick and mortar and the internet-based type company. So let's get into this just for a little bit. The entrepreneur has basically 5 factors to think about as he or she is thinking about setting up their company. Now, you see in this chart here, you see a nice building, and you see these little bubbles with information in them around the building. But that doesn't have to be a building. That could be a network, or it could be for lack of a better word, a cloud. So the things you have to think about don't change. You still have to think about these factors. Do you have the resources you need? Is the resource availability question answered? Do your customers have access to your business operation in a way that's going to keep them coming back? Is the business environment good in this location? What are the costs and the site availability issues that you have to deal with? Certainly for brick and mortar, site availability is a big deal. For internet-based business, it's not so much site availability as it is costs, and how do you operate effectively with your employees? And then lastly, and this is a big one right here, is entrepreneur's personal preference. And perhaps we would be surprised at how many times the entrepreneur's personal preference becomes really the driving factor in locating a business. I've seen examples of that where that was the driving factor. Now, in selecting a good location, we certainly think customer accessibility is of primary importance. And if you're in a situation where you have a lot of walk-in traffic with your customers, and that's required to operate your business, and you want to have a good brick and mortar location where it's easy access for your customers. If you're in a niche market where you just have a few targeted customers and only those customers need access to you, then you'll locate there. And if you have the potential for large shipping costs, then you're going to want to locate your business close to where your customers are going to be, so you can eliminate that shipping requirement. I had a good chance a number of years ago to visit the Jaguar manufacturing plant in Great Britain, and I noticed that the company that was building the leather seats and the leather upholstery for the cars was located across the street. And I asked a few questions about that and come to find out that Lear had built their company right there so that they could satisfy the just-in-time requirements of the Jaguar manufacturing plant, and also to minimize their shipping cost on the product. They just moved it across the street on an as-needed basis. And so we're seeing that more and more in the industrial manufacturing world. You also want to locate your company where the business environment is good. And business environment includes a lot of things, but down at the bottom of this chart right here, you'll see several key things you have to address when you're thinking about the business environment. What about the competition? Where are they located? Where are they operating? And it's not always a fact that you want to locate away from your competition. Sometimes you want to locate close to where your competition is for a number of reasons. One of which is there are trained, qualified personnel floating around there all the time that are available to work in your business. You want to look at the local regulations, the state regulations. What are the legal requirements? What are the location restrictions that exist? In a lot of communities, there's a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of requirements that a company has to satisfy in order to locate in that community. We have that more and more in Texas, by the way, and in particular in Dallas County, Collin County, some of the counties immediately surrounding Dallas County where there's high growth going on. Then you have to look at tax structure, and that's a big deal right now all throughout the country with the economic issues that we're facing. And so states that have good positive tax structure tend to attract business more so than states that do not have good positive tax structure. You're seeing that right now with the migration of businesses to Florida and Texas and other states that have good tax structures away from the high tax structure states on the east and west coast. What is the cost of living for your employees? That's a big deal. If you have a lot of employees in your company, then cost of living is a big deal. And again, these states with good positive tax structures tend to have good positive cost of living structures as well, or cost of living environment as well. Now, what are the availability of resources? Well, if you've got a manufacturing company, then resource availability may be a big deal. If I'm building a product that requires a lot of energy, then I'm going to want to locate my plant close to where the source of the energy is, whether it be provided electrical power or petroleum energy or gas energy or whatever it takes to operate my plant. I may well want to locate my plant close to those energy sources. Or if I'm building products out of steel, then I may want to locate close to where the steel sources are. Or if I've got to have coal as a kind of a raw product input into my operation, like a big electrical power plant, then I'm going to want to locate my power plant close to where there is a supply of coal, or to where I can get coal to my site. So the availability of resources is a big deal. Personal preference of the entrepreneur is also a big deal. I can give you a specific example of a small semiconductor company located to Richardson a few years ago, just north of Richardson along Highway 75, and I would drive by there and I'd scratch my head and say, why? Well, I can't understand why that company located in that particular spot. There's no other industry like that around, but yet that other company's located there. And then come to find out, the CEO of the company lived in the neighborhood just about a half mile away, and so it was the CEO's choice to move his headquarters there to that one location, even though it didn't seem to make a lot of business sense. Or at least there was other sites that would have made better business sense. This was a case where the entrepreneur wanted his company close to where he lived, and so he located it there. Site availability and cost is also a big deal, particularly if you've got a mostly brick and mortar type business. And if I've got an ongoing business, then there's a good chance I may well want to buy a site somewhere. But if I've got a new start business, then I certainly want to think about leasing whatever facilities that I have. There's a lot of reasons for doing that, and it's not in our nature for some reason to want to lease assets. But in this case, the cost of leasing is far better than the cost of buying most of the time. And most of the time, startup companies, entrepreneurial companies, are short of cash anyway, so why not conserve cash and lease your facilities, at least until you have the cash built up available to go purchase what you want. So you avoid the large cash outlay, and it allows you to get into facilities sometimes a lot faster than if you constructed the facilities or if you bought existing facilities. So I encourage all entrepreneurs who are just beginning to consider leasing, not only for your facilities, but for your major equipment as well. If you survey business owners, you'll find out the majority of business owners prefer to purchase their equipment. If you look here at this table on the left-hand side, you see that 63% of entrepreneurs always like to purchase their equipment. And I kind of think I know what drives that. I think that it's in our nature to want to own the assets that we're using, and it's not in our nature to want to lease them and have somebody else own them. And so we have to kind of rationalize that. We have to kind of analyze that in our minds and come to grips with it. Most entrepreneurs will tell you that it's cheaper overall to purchase rather than lease. There's some downside of purchasing as opposed to leasing. Once you purchase a piece of equipment, then you own it, and at some point in time you're going to have to provide the maintenance for it. And particularly on long-lived, expensive equipment assets, the maintenance can become a driving cost on that asset, and so you as the owner, you have to deal with that. If you're leasing it, then it's the other owner that has to deal with it. So you can work out lease maintenance agreements to have your equipment taken care So most entrepreneurs prefer to own rather than lease. I will tell you that I encourage most entrepreneurs to lease rather than own, at least initially. And then once you get yourself into a better cash situation, then you can think about owning more of your assets. On manufacturing equipment, there's kind of a general rule that if you can, you want to use general purpose equipment as opposed to special purpose equipment. Now, I recognize that in some cases, in some manufacturing cases, you have to have at least some level of special purpose equipment. A great example of this is the semiconductor business. Semiconductor devices require a lot of special equipment to manufacture them, and so the major companies like Texas Instruments, located here in North Texas, spend a ton of money every year just on special equipment they use on their production line. A lot of times it's just test equipment, other times it's assembly equipment, it's all kinds of fabrication equipment, and it's all special purpose. Once the company is not building that particular device or the company is not using that particular material technology, then the equipment is no longer useful for that purpose. And so the downside of that is that the resale value on that equipment typically will be pretty low because it's special purpose. There's no other use for it other than for which it was designed. On the other hand, if you have general purpose equipment that you can adapt to your manufacturing operation, then the resale on that can be better. It just depends upon how much you use it, but it can be a lot better. So the general rule of thumb is use general purpose equipment if you can, avoid special purpose equipment if you can. On retail store and office equipment operations, there's all kinds of equipment and supplies that you have to think about if you're going to operate those businesses. In the retail business, you've got display racks and sales counters and point of sale systems, and you've got office equipment in the back room of all kinds, and you've got computers that drive your networks, and all of those things you have to think about if you're going to operate a company. And if you're going to operate a brick and mortar company, you've got to really think about it because you got to have all that type of what I'll call infrastructure installed before you can really get your operation going. And another thing you've got to think about too as you set up the facilities is the business image. What kind of image do you want to project with your business? And then once you answer that question, that's going to dictate what kind of furnishings and lighting and displays and signage that you put into your business. And this can also be expensive. And so you can see kind of the bottom line of what I'm saying is if you've got a startup company, you want to be careful about how you spend money on these type of equipment and display items, and try to save as much money as you can. Try to lease as much as you can as you start up your business, and just try to be smart in how you spend your money. Cash management and cash itself is the biggest issue for small companies and startup companies. I have established over the years 5 rules for entrepreneurs. The first rule for entrepreneur is cash is king. And the companies that manage their cash well and that really treat it as king tend to survive and do better than the others. So let's shift our talk now just for a little bit and talk about home-based businesses. Home-based businesses are becoming more and more popular, and employees who work in their home are becoming more and more popular. These are what I'll call distance employees or network employees or virtual employees. I have a son who is a software developer, and he operates out of his home. He works for a larger company, and they allow him to set up his own system at his home, and he operates out of his home, and occasionally he has to attend operations meetings and project status meetings and things like that, but typically it's only about 1 day a week, and then the rest of the time he's operating out of his home office setup. So it's a very good deal. Well, why does he want to do that? Well, look here, it saves time and money on commutes. He doesn't have to drive into Dallas every day. He can get everything up and running very quickly with his setup that he has with his computers. He's able to spend more time with family and friends. And if he were operating his own company, he sees these 2 benefits right here. He's doing something he wants to do and getting paid for it, and he's his own boss. So there's a lot of reasons to think about why you might want to start a home-based business. There's also some reasons why you do not want to start a home-based business. Here's 3 things that you've got to think about is, if I'm operating out of my home, what kind of business image do I project? and particularly on my mailing address. So I hand you my business card. I'm operating out of my home. I look at that address. It's very clearly a residential area in whatever city you're in. Then that may tarnish your business image just a little bit. I don't know, but it's something you have to think about. There's also legal considerations in most neighborhoods about businesses that you can operate out of your home. There's laws that limit how many cars you can park at your house, and there's laws that limit what you can do from a business standpoint in a residential neighborhood. So in every community, you have to examine and find out what is allowed and what is not allowed in terms of businesses and homes in this community. And every community has a few different twists. You have to really understand what the particular community that you're in or that you're looking to be in allows you to do. And then there's also the issue of family conflicts. And that is a very real issue. We talk about that, we tend to brush it off, but it's a very real issue. In my son's case, he has 5 children at home. Got his nest is full. And what he does is he has an office that he's constructed in his backyard. And he goes to his office every morning and goes to work right on time. And just like online courses, operating a business out of your home requires that kind of discipline in order to succeed. So he goes to his office, and if he doesn't want to be interrupted, he has a little miniature stop sign that he sets on the pathway outside his office so that his family and his children know not to interrupt him while that stop sign's out. When it's okay to interrupt him, he takes the stop sign up and moves it. And so they have, in his place, in his situation, he has a nice system set up so that everybody in the family understands when he can be interrupted and not interrupted. And then, of course, he keeps regular hours and has a chance to be with his family at the hours that most working people would be with their families. And so that works pretty well for them. They have the discipline to operate that way, and it's very nice not to have to commute. Now, let's look at this whole situation of e-commerce. We were talking about, in my son's case, he's working for another company. He's producing for them. But if you're operating your own company out of your home or out of a warehouse or wherever you're operating from, then and it's primarily an e-commerce or an internet-based. I really don't like the term e-commerce. I like internet-based. Then you've got to think about what are the limitations that I have. Do I have some website limitations, not only development and cost, but do I have the bandwidth that I need to really be able to operate? What kind of software is going to be required for me to operate completely with the business model that I have in mind? And do I have to integrate e-commerce and brick and mortar operations? A lot of retail operations now have integrated or are integrating their internet operations with their brick and mortar operations. This is true literally across the board. I've gotten to the point now in my own commerce activities that before I go to a big box retailer to try to look for something that I need, I'll go online and try to find it at that retailer's online store before I go to the physical store. And then even once I find it, I'll confirm, does this store have it in stock or does that store have it in stock, particularly if I have access to 2 or more stores that business operates. And you know, a good example here is Walmart. Everybody's got multiple Walmarts they can get to, and so if I've got a product that I know Walmart carries, I go to their online website, I find that product, and then they will tell me very quickly exactly which stores have this in stock, and I can put it on hold or I can buy it, whatever I want to do. A lot of flexibility. And so in this area right here, you're seeing a great integration of e-commerce and brick and mortar operations right now, and as far as I'm concerned, it's for the good. It's much more efficient for the customer. Now, there's some non-technical issues that we have to think about too, and that's the privacy of transactions, and this is going to be an ongoing big issue in our internet-based operations. And can we secure our customers' profile information? A lot of companies collect your information. Being able to secure it is still a question. In most cases, it's secured, but every day we read of hackers breaking in and getting access to information, or somebody losing a database full of Social Security numbers or driver's licenses. And so it's a real issue. That in itself is a growing industry among us. You know, network security, internet security is a growing industry. And learning how to handle that is a big challenge for us right now. Now, another downside that we have here is the inability of customers to touch or try on products. In many cases, that's not necessary that you have to touch or try on a product, but in a lot of cases it is necessary. And I was thinking about a specific example the other day of how would I handle the purchase of, say, a very large bulldozer that I really wanted to buy for my construction company, I would have to be physically present to look that over, to run it, to kind of operate a little bit, before I would ever fork over the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it costs to purchase a piece of equipment like that. And so in some cases, you've got to touch or try on a product. In other cases, you can purchase just by looking at it. It's not a problem. So you have to decide, where do I fit with my company? Where does my company fit in this spectrum? And are there some limitations there that I need to think about with my company? The e-commerce business models, there's a lot of those floating around. We'll talk about a few of them here in just a second. But basically, the definition of a business model is a group of shared characteristics, behaviors, and goals that a firm follows in a particular business situation. So when somebody says, this is my business model, typically speaking, that's not a very specific statement, because I'm really trying to define for the listener or the reader what are the characteristics here that define my business model. What kind of behaviors do we have, or goals do we have? You know, how do we really operate? How does that define my business? And then once I can define that, that becomes my business model. Okay, so let's look at some basic internet business models. And you've seen these over and over, and we'll talk just a little bit about these as we go forward. For internet businesses, there's generally three types: the business-to-business type customer interface, or the business-to-consumer type interface, or the consumer-to-consumer type interface. And if I were to sit down here and say, okay, give me some examples of each of these, every one of you can come up with some examples of companies or government agencies that fit into these categories right here. Now, so given that we know we're going to have commerce being transacted on the internet, then what kind of online presence do we want for our company? If we're not selling anything on the internet, then it'll be either content-based or information-based. And content-based is a type of website where we're just showing you a lot of stuff about our company, about our products. An information-based website is a little bit different than that, in the sense that I may be publishing a blog, or I may be publishing information from other sources just to provide information for my customers on that site. I encourage, where it's a benefit to the business, that a small business go ahead and set up a transaction-based model for the internet portion of their business. It allows customers to be able to do business transactions right on the internet. It's a tremendous convenience for customers when you can set up a website that's a well-designed, well-thought-out website that allows you to do business transactions. So those are just some things to think about in terms of the types of internet or e-commerce models that we look at in today's world. And those are changing, by the way. There's new ways emerging, and I think the biggest impact that's going to be had there is through social media. You know, the ability through social media to not only just post information back and forth, but to be able to go from that site directly into a internet commerce site where I can actually transact business. So on Facebook, I see, say, some kind of a posting about an HP computer or iPhone, and I then click on that iPhone link. That takes me immediately over to the site where I can buy it. And so there's a lot of interaction going on in terms of how I get access to internet-based business sites in order to do a transaction. On the consumer-to-consumer model, most of the time you'll see this done, it's not always true, but you'll see it done in an auction type setup. And there's a couple of real examples here. We'll see a list here in a minute of auction sites that everybody's familiar with. You know, the one you're most familiar with is probably eBay. Very successful big company that has set up auction sites for consumers to sell goods back and forth between each other. It works pretty well. It's a very, very clever model, and over the years they've gotten the bugs worked out, and it works nice and efficiently right now. So I suspect most of us have done transactions on eBay before, so we know a little bit about how that auction model works. The top 10 online auction sites, you can look at this list here, and every one of these, it's not every one of them, but certainly some of them you've probably done some business with. eBay and Amazon is real popular. It's Got to Go, I've heard about not too long ago, and it sounds like a very interesting website where you can get rid of stuff that you just need to get rid of. We all have stuff like that. But anyway, these are the top 10 auction sites. That's consumer to consumer. On a content-based model, what we're doing there is sometimes, we don't have to always do this, but typically on a really good content model, they will charge you for access. to that material. And so that's the way that revenue is generated on that model, the content-based model. So if I have a content-based model, I'll set up a website. I'm providing some exclusive information or exclusive data that people need, and so my customers will sign up for a membership once they're members, and they can have access to that data. And there may be further limitations after that. It depends upon the type of company and the type of data. The information-based model is one that's becoming very popular now. Most every company that has a website has a blog on that website, and that's a website, and with the blog, I'm conveying information either about my business or about the business environment all the time. The downside of that is you've got to maintain it for it to be effective, and it generally is an everyday type of maintenance. The transaction-based model is exactly what it says. It allows me to be able to actually do business on that website. And then the text calls this an emerging model. It's really already here, the blog site, where a company has a website where you can do transactions. It also has a blog tab, or a tab where you can get information not only from the company about products and product areas, but from other companies as well. And so there's a good source of information on that site. But blogs are very, very popular right now. Most every new site coming up that's a commerce site has some kind of a blog with it. They're nice to have, but they also require a lot of maintenance. You cannot let these sit for a long time or they become meaningless to your customers. Okay, that ends our lecture on Chapter 9. Take note of that, and I would encourage you now to, if you haven't already done it, to read Chapter 9 and get prepared to take the Chapter 9 minor exam.